I must warn the reader at the outset that the narrative which follows is of substantial length, being one of those cases whose threads were so numerous and far-reaching that a complete account cannot be rendered briefly. I would therefore suggest that you make yourself comfortable, secure whatever refreshment suits your taste, and prepare to accompany Dr. Watson and myself through one of the most intricate affairs it has ever been my fortune to unravel. The affair of the Vermilion Cipher, a Sherlock Holmes mystery by Arthur Conan Doyle if he were here today. The Gathering Storm, Chapter 1. It was upon a bitterly cold evening in the early days of March, 1895, that I found myself once more in the familiar surroundings of 221B Baker Street. The fire crackled merrily in the grate, casting dancing shadows upon the cluttered walls of our sitting room, where the accumulated evidence of my friends' many cases lay scattered about in what appeared to be chaotic disorder, but which I knew to be a system comprehensible only to Sherlock Holmes himself. Holmes sat in his favourite armchair, his long, thin fingers pressed together in an attitude of deep contemplation, his grey eyes half closed as wisps of smoke from his clay pipe curled upward toward the ceiling. For 3 days he had been thus, barely moving, scarcely eating, locked in some private mental struggle that I dared not interrupt. I had learned, through many years of friendship and professional association, that these periods of intense cerebral activity were best left undisturbed. I had returned to Baker Street some 6 months previous, following the tragic death of my dear wife, Mary. The house in Paddington had become unbearable in its emptiness, each room a monument to my loss. Holmes, with characteristic delicacy, had said nothing when I appeared one evening with my old service bag, merely nodding toward my former bedroom and remarking that Mrs. Hudson had kept it aired in anticipation of my return. It was a gesture of friendship that I shall never forget, for though Holmes was a man who professed to have little understanding of emotion, he possessed a deep and abiding loyalty to those few souls he admitted to his inner circle. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly, breaking 3 days of near silence, "you have been to your club this afternoon." I looked up from my medical journal, startled. "I have indeed. How could you possibly?" "Pray do not tell me how I could possibly," Holmes interrupted with a thin smile. "The mud upon your left boot is of a peculiar reddish clay found only in St. James's, and you have carried the evening edition of the Globe in your pocket. I can see the corner protruding, which you favour only when reading in the smoking room of the Tankerville. Furthermore, there is a faint aroma of their particular blend of Turkish tobacco clinging to your jacket. Elementary. You never fail to amaze me, Holmes," I said, returning his smile. "Trifles, Watson, mere trifles. The mind must have stimulation or it stagnates. I fear these past days have offered precious little of interest. The criminal classes have been remarkably inactive, or perhaps merely more successful in their endeavours than usual." He rose from his chair with sudden energy and began pacing before the fireplace, his dressing gown flowing behind him like the wings of some great bird of prey. "I require data, Watson. Without data, the greatest analytical machine in the world is reduced to mere speculation." As if in answer to his complaint, the sound of hurried footsteps upon the stairs reached our ears, followed by an urgent knocking at our door. Mrs. Hudson's voice could be heard remonstrating with someone, but the knocking continued with increased vigour. "Ah," Holmes exclaimed, his eyes suddenly alight with interest. "Unless I am much mistaken, Watson, your wish for my engagement in some matter of interest is about to be granted. Pray observe the urgency of the knocking, short, sharp raps with no pause for response. This is someone in considerable distress. Note also that Mrs. Hudson's protestations have been ignored, suggesting either a person of considerable social standing who is unused to denial, or someone whose fear has overcome their natural deference to propriety." "Come," Holmes called out, and the door burst open to admit a most extraordinary figure. Our visitor was a man of perhaps 45 years of age, tall and powerfully built, with the bearing of a military man despite his civilian dress. His face was deeply tanned, speaking of long years spent under tropical suns, and a livid scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, giving him a somewhat fierce aspect. But it was his eyes that arrested attention. They darted about the room with the restless vigilance of a man accustomed to danger, and there was in them a haunted quality that spoke of some terrible recent experience. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit of dark blue cloth, though it was in considerable disarray. His collar was askew, his tie loosened, and his waistcoat bore what appeared to be a small tear near the second button. His hands, I noted with my medical training, showed signs of recent abrasion, and there was a slight tremor in his fingers. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he gasped, looking from one of us to the other. "I am he," said Holmes, gesturing to a chair. "Pray be seated, sir. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, in whose discretion you may place absolute trust. I perceive that you have come some distance in great haste, that you are recently returned from India, Bengal, I should say, and that you have within the last 3 hours received a communication that has caused you considerable alarm. Your name, I venture to suggest, is Colonel or perhaps Major Ashworth." Our visitor sank into the proffered chair, his face a mask of astonishment. "Good God, how could you know all this?" Holmes waved his hand dismissively. "The process is simplicity itself. Your bearing and the particular cut of your hair speak unmistakably of military service. The deep tan of your skin and certain peculiarities of your dress, that style of button, for instance, is particular to tailors in Calcutta, indicate recent residence in India. Bengal specifically, because there is upon your boot a trace of the distinctive red mud found in that region, quite unlike the soil of Madras or Bombay. The telegram protruding from your breast pocket, with its characteristic yellow paper and the time stamp just visible at the corner, tells me when you received your urgent news. As for your name, I confess that is the merest guess based upon your remarkable resemblance to Sir Henry Ashworth, whose portrait I observed in the Illustrated London News some months past. The caption described his brother, lately returned from service with the Bengal Lancers. Am I correct? In every particular, breathed our visitor. I am indeed Major Geoffrey Ashworth, and I have come to you because I fear my life is in the gravest danger." Holmes's expression became instantly more serious, and he took his seat opposite our guest, his hands clasped beneath his chin. "Pray tell us your story, Major, and omit no detail, however trivial it may seem. Watson, perhaps you would be good enough to pour the Major a brandy. He has sustained a considerable shock." Major Ashworth accepted the glass with a grateful nod and took a deep draught before beginning his narrative. As he spoke, Holmes sat perfectly still, his eyes never leaving our client's face, absorbing every word, every gesture, every nuance of expression. "Mr. Holmes," Ashworth began, his voice steadier now, "I must first provide you with certain background information, for without it, the events of this past week will make no sense whatever. I served for 23 years in India, the last 10 of which were spent in Bengal. I rose through the ranks to achieve my majority, and was, I may say without immodesty, considered a capable and trustworthy officer. My service was not without its dangers. This scar I bear is a souvenir of an ambush by Pathan raiders in '87, but I performed my duties to the best of my abilities and earned, so I believed, the respect of my fellow officers and the men under my command." He paused to take another sip of brandy, and I observed that the tremor in his hands had begun to subside. "5 years ago, I was assigned to a particularly sensitive post. I became the custodian of certain documents pertaining to the defenses of the northwestern frontier, matters of the utmost strategic importance. The nature of these documents was such that their disclosure to any foreign power would have placed the entire British position in India in jeopardy. I took my responsibilities most seriously, Mr. Holmes. The documents were kept in a specially constructed safe in my quarters, and I alone possessed the combination." "Most commendable," murmured Holmes. "Pray continue." "It was in the autumn of 1893 that disaster struck. I had been called away from my quarters on urgent regimental business, a report of unrest in a nearby village. When I returned some 4 hours later, I discovered that my safe had been opened and the documents stolen. There had been no forced entry, no sign of violence, The safe appeared simply to have been opened by someone who knew the combination. But that was impossible, Mr. Holmes. I had shared the combination with no one, written it down nowhere. I had committed it to memory and taken every precaution to ensure its security. Most singular, observed Holmes. I perceive that this theft had serious consequences for your career. A shadow passed over Ashworth's features. Indeed, Mr. Holmes, though I protested my innocence, though I submitted to the most rigorous investigation, the conclusion was inescapable. Either I had been criminally negligent in protecting the combination, or I had deliberately betrayed my trust. There was no evidence of the latter, thank God, or I should have faced court-martial and the firing squad. As it was, I was cashiered from the service, my reputation destroyed, my honor impugned. The bitterness in his voice was palpable, and I found myself moved by sympathy for this man whose life had been so thoroughly disrupted by circumstances apparently beyond his control. The documents, Holmes interjected, were they ever recovered? Never, sir. They vanished as completely as if they had never existed. The investigation concluded that they had been passed to agents of a foreign power, which power was never determined, and that they were presumably now in the hands of those who would use them to Britain's detriment. The strategic dispositions detailed in those documents were, of course, immediately altered, but the damage had been done. Several intelligence networks were compromised, and I have reason to believe that at least 3 of our agents lost their lives as a direct result of the theft. Holmes nodded slowly. A most grievous affair. And now, Major Ashworth, we come to the present crisis. What has occurred to bring you in such haste to my door this evening? Ashworth reached into his breast pocket and withdrew the telegram Holmes had earlier observed. This arrived at my club 3 hours ago. I had thought to begin rebuilding my life here in London, though the stigma of the affair has followed me. My brother, Sir Henry, has been kind enough to provide me with an allowance, though our relationship has been strained by the scandal. I live modestly in rooms in Kensington, and I spend my days attempting to discover what truly happened in Bengal, for I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, upon whatever honor I have remaining, that I was not responsible for the theft of those documents. He handed the telegram to Holmes, who studied it intently for several moments before passing it to me. The message was brief and chilling. The truth will out at midnight. Come alone to Limehouse Pier. Bring no police. Your reputation and your life depend upon it. A friend, most intriguing, said Holmes, returning the telegram to Ashworth. And you have no notion as to who might have sent this? None whatever. I have racked my brains attempting to think who might style themselves a friend in such circumstances. I have made no friends since my return to England. The scandal has seen to that. And yet this message suggests that someone knows something of the truth regarding the theft of those documents. Mr. Holmes, I am not a fanciful man, but I confess that I am afraid. The summons to Limehouse, one of the most dangerous quarters of London, at midnight, alone, it has all the hallmarks of a trap. And yet, if there is even the slightest chance that this mysterious correspondent can provide evidence that would clear my name, I must take that chance. Holmes rose and stood before the fire, his hands clasped behind his back, his profile sharp against the dancing flames. I perceive several interesting features of this case, Major Ashworth. Firstly, the timing. Why should this communication arrive now, nearly 2 years after your disgrace? Secondly, the location. Limehouse is indeed a dangerous quarter, but it is also the haunt of many who have dealings with the Orient, including a significant Chinese population. This may be significant, given the Indian origins of your troubles. Thirdly, the wording of the telegram itself. The truth will out is a curious phrase, suggesting that some active process of revelation is underway, rather than merely the provision of information. He turned to face our client directly. Major Ashworth, I shall be frank with you. I believe that you are indeed walking into a trap, but not perhaps the sort of trap you imagine. Someone wishes to draw you to Limehouse for purposes of their own, and those purposes may be murderous. However, I also believe that this someone possesses information regarding the theft of those documents, and that by following this thread, we may unravel the entire mystery. Therefore, I propose that you do exactly as the telegram instructs. You will go to Limehouse Pier at midnight, but you will not go alone despite the warning. Watson and I will accompany you at a discreet distance, and we shall see what this midnight meeting reveals." I felt a familiar thrill of excitement at these words. It had been too long since Holmes and I had ventured forth together on one of his investigations, and despite the danger implicit in the situation, I welcomed the prospect of action. "Mr. Holmes," Ashworth said, rising from his chair with evident emotion, "I cannot express the depth of my gratitude. If you can help me clear my name, restore my honor, I shall be forever in your debt." "Let us not speak of gratitude until we have achieved something worthy of it," Holmes replied. "For now, I suggest that you return to your rooms and prepare yourself for this evening's adventure. Take a light dinner and ensure that you are dressed warmly. The Thames in March is a cold and inhospitable place. We shall meet you at the entrance to Limehouse Reach at precisely 1/4 before midnight. Watson and I will position ourselves so as to observe whatever transpires while remaining undetected. Should you find yourself in danger, you have only to call out, and we shall be at your side immediately." After Ashworth had departed, pressed into service by Holmes with various instructions as to his conduct that evening, my friend returned to his chair and sat in contemplative silence for some time. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts, and I busied myself with examining my old service revolver, ensuring that it was in proper working order. If we were to venture into Limehouse at midnight, it would be well to be prepared for violence. "A most singular case, Watson," Holmes said at last. "There are already several points of considerable interest. Did you observe the Major's hands?" "I noted the abrasions," I replied. "Recent injuries, I should say, sustained within the last day or two." "Precisely. And the tear in his waistcoat, did you observe that it was made by a blade, not by catching upon some projection? Someone has attempted to stab our client, Watson, and quite recently. Furthermore, there was upon his left shoulder a trace of white powder barely visible, which I believe to be plaster dust. This suggests that he has been in some building undergoing renovation or repair. These facts, combined with the sudden appearance of this mysterious telegram, paint a picture of a man who is being actively hunted. But by whom, Holmes? And to what purpose? Those are the questions, are they not? Consider the original theft of the documents, a safe opened without force, the combination known to no one but Ashworth himself. How was it accomplished? There are several possibilities. First, that Ashworth is lying, and that he did share the combination or leave it written somewhere it could be discovered. I am inclined to discount this theory. His manner was that of a truthful man, and his evident distress at the stain upon his honor seemed quite genuine. Second, that the combination was observed by someone while Ashworth was opening the safe. This would require considerable skill and opportunity. Third, that the safe was not, in fact, opened by means of the combination at all, but by some other method that left no trace. Is such a thing possible? I asked, intrigued despite myself. There are men, Watson, masters of their criminal craft, who can open any safe by means of a sensitive touch and an acute sense of hearing. But such men are rare, and their services do not come cheaply. Whoever stole those documents had both the resources to employ such an expert and the knowledge that the documents existed and were worth stealing. This suggests an organization of considerable sophistication. You mentioned Limehouse being connected to the Orient, I observed. Do you suspect some Chinese involvement in the affair? Holmes shook his head. I suspect nothing as yet, Watson. I merely note the connection as potentially significant. The Chinese criminal societies that operate in London are indeed formidable, but their interests typically lie in opium, protection, and smuggling. The theft of military documents from India seems outside their usual sphere of operations. However, they do maintain extensive networks that span from London to the Far East, and it is possible that they acted as intermediaries for some other power. He rose and began to pace once more, his nervous energy evident in every movement. No, Watson, there is something deeper here, something that connects the theft in Bengal to the events of today. The telegram speaks of "the truth will out." This suggests that someone is prepared to reveal what actually occurred. But why now? And why summon Ashworth to such a dangerous location? Is it truly to impart information, or is there some more sinister purpose at work? Perhaps we shall discover the answers tonight, I suggested. Perhaps, Holmes agreed, though his tone suggested that he anticipated complications. In the meantime, I suggest we both prepare ourselves. Ensure that your revolver is loaded, Watson, and wear your darkest clothes. We may have need of both stealth and force before this night is through. Chapter 2, The Limehouse Rendezvous. The cab deposited us at the entrance to Limehouse Reach at precisely 20 minutes before midnight. A thick fog had rolled in from the Thames, reducing visibility to a matter of feet and lending the already sinister neighborhood an even more oppressive aspect. The street lamps glowed dimly through the murk like malevolent eyes, and the sound of water lapping against the pilings of the various wharves provided a constant, melancholy accompaniment to our progress. Holmes had insisted that we arrive before Ashworth, the better to secure a vantage point from which we might observe without being observed. We had both dressed entirely in black, and Holmes had added to his ensemble a dark scarf that he wound about the lower portion of his face, rendering him nearly invisible in the darkness. I carried my revolver in my coat pocket, my hand resting upon its reassuring solidity. "This way, Watson," Holmes whispered, guiding me along the waterfront. "There, that warehouse, the one with the damaged roof. It provides an excellent view of the pier while offering us concealment." We made our way carefully across the slippery cobblestones and slipped into the warehouse through a door that hung askew on its hinges. The interior was a cavern of darkness, filled with the smell of rotting wood and stagnant water. Holmes produced a small electric torch from his pocket, one of the many ingenious devices he had adopted over the years, and played its beam briefly about the space until he located a stairway leading to an upper floor. We ascended carefully, testing each step before placing our full weight upon it, for the structure was clearly in a state of advanced decay. The upper floor proved to be partially open to the elements, the roof having collapsed in several places, but it afforded an excellent view of the pier below through the gaps in the walls. "Capital," murmured Holmes, positioning himself where he could observe while remaining in shadow. "Now we wait." The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. The fog continued to thicken, and I found myself straining my eyes to penetrate its murky veil. The night sounds of Limehouse surrounded us, distant voices raised in argument or song, the occasional clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the mournful hoot of a steamer somewhere out on the river. It was a neighborhood that never truly slept, where the denizens of the night pursued their various trades and pleasures in an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. At 10 minutes before midnight, a figure emerged from the fog and made its way toward the pier. Even at a distance and in the poor visibility, I recognized the military bearing of Major Ashworth. He walked with deliberate steps, his hands visible at his sides, making no attempt at concealment. He reached the end of the pier and stood there, a solitary figure wreathed in fog, waiting. "Courage," I heard Holmes murmur appreciatively. "Whatever his past troubles, the Major has not lost his nerve." 5 minutes passed, then 10. Ashworth remained motionless, though I could see from the occasional turn of his head that he was scanning his surroundings, alert to any approach. The fog seemed to grow thicker still, until I could barely make out his figure at all. And then, so suddenly that I nearly exclaimed aloud, 2 figures materialized out of the fog on either side of Ashworth. They had approached with extraordinary stealth, and even Holmes, with his keen senses, had not detected their arrival until they were upon their quarry. The figures were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by what appeared to be scarves or masks. They closed upon Ashworth with swift, purposeful movements, and I saw the gleam of something metallic in the hand of one of them. "Now, Watson," Holmes hissed, and we were both in motion, clattering down the decrepit stairway and bursting out into the fog-shrouded night. But even as we ran toward the pier, a shot rang out, its report shockingly loud in the muffled atmosphere. I heard a cry of pain, and by the time we reached the pier itself, the scene had transformed into one of chaos. Ashworth lay upon the wooden planking, clutching his shoulder, while the two attackers had turned to face us, their surprise evident even behind their masks. "Hold," Holmes commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "You are surrounded. Surrender at once." It was a magnificent bluff, for we were but two against their two, and they were clearly desperate men. But the fog and darkness worked in our favor, creating the impression that we might have brought reinforcements. The two attackers hesitated, exchanging glances, and in that moment of indecision, one of them made a fatal mistake. He raised his hand, revealing a revolver, and pointed it directly at Holmes. I had no choice. My own weapon was in my hand before I fully realized what I was doing, and I fired. The man cried out and staggered backward, his weapon falling from his grasp. His companion immediately turned and fled, disappearing into the fog with astonishing speed. I fired after him, but the shot went wide, and within seconds he had vanished completely. Holmes was instantly at the side of the wounded attacker, kneeling beside him and pulling away the scarf that concealed his features. I hurried to Major Ashworth, who was struggling to sit up, his face pale with shock and pain. "Lie still, Major," I commanded, shifting into my professional capacity. "Let me examine that wound." The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing the bone and major blood vessels by what seemed to be a fortunate chance. I bound the wound tightly with my handkerchief, applying pressure to stanch the bleeding. "Watson," Holmes called, his voice urgent, "I need you here." I left Ashworth propped against a piling and joined Holmes beside the wounded attacker. The man was still conscious, though my bullet had struck him in the upper chest, and his breathing was labored and irregular. Even in the dim light, I could see that his injury was serious, possibly mortal. Holmes had removed the man's mask entirely, revealing features that were unmistakably Oriental in character. High cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes, and skin of a golden hue that spoke of Far Eastern ancestry. "Can you save him?" Holmes asked me quietly. I examined the wound as best I could in the darkness and shook my head. "The bullet has likely damaged the lung. He needs immediate surgical attention if he is to have any chance at all. We must get him to a hospital at once." "Not yet," Holmes said, and there was a hardness in his voice that I had seldom heard. He leaned close to the wounded man and spoke in a language I did not recognize. It sounded vaguely similar to Chinese, but with differences that suggested it might be some dialect or related tongue. The man's eyes widened in surprise, and he replied in the same language, his voice barely above a whisper. For several minutes, Holmes conversed with the dying man, his questions apparently growing more urgent as the man's responses became weaker. Finally, the man spoke a few final words, coughed once, and was still. Holmes gently closed the man's eyes and rose to his feet. "He is gone," I stated unnecessarily, feeling the professional sadness that always accompanied death, even the death of one who had sought to harm us. "Indeed," Holmes replied, his expression grim. "But before he died, he provided some most illuminating information. Watson, this case is far more complex and dangerous than I had initially supposed. We are dealing with an organization of considerable reach and ruthlessness, and Major Ashworth is at the center of a web of intrigue that spans from India to the darker corners of London." "What did he tell you?" I asked. "And what language was that?" "A dialect of Cantonese," Holmes replied. "One of several Chinese languages I have found it useful to study. As for what he revealed, that must wait. First, we must secure medical attention for Major Ashworth and report this incident to the authorities. Though I confess I am reluctant to involve the official police at this juncture, the death of this man makes it necessary." We helped Ashworth to his feet, and with him supported between us, we made our way back through the fog-shrouded streets in search of a cab. The Major was stoic in his pain, asking no questions, though I could see from his expression that he was deeply troubled by what had occurred. Fortune favored us, for we encountered a late-night hansom within a few minutes of leaving the waterfront. Holmes directed the driver to take us to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where I knew we would find competent staff even at this late hour. During the journey, Holmes maintained a thoughtful silence, his fingers drumming upon his knee in that characteristic manner that indicated his mind was racing through possibilities and probabilities. At the hospital, I saw to it that Ashworth was properly attended to. The wound, while painful, was not life-threatening, and after it was cleaned and properly dressed, the Major was made comfortable in a private room. I administered a mild sedative to ensure he would rest, and only then did Holmes and I speak privately with the senior physician on duty. The other man did not survive, Holmes informed the doctor. The body remains at Limehouse Pier. I shall notify Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard immediately, and no doubt there will be an investigation. Dr. Watson fired in defense of myself and Major Ashworth, and the shooting was entirely justified. The physician nodded gravely. I shall prepare my own report for the authorities. This is a serious business, Mr. Holmes. More serious than you imagine, Doctor, Holmes replied. But I trust that you will accord Major Ashworth every care. He is the victim in this affair, not the perpetrator. We left the hospital as the first grey light of dawn was beginning to penetrate the thinning fog. Holmes hailed another cab, and we returned to Baker Street, where Mrs. Hudson, bless her, had kept the fire burning and had prepared a pot of strong tea against our return. Now, Holmes, I said, once we were settled in our sitting room, you must tell me what that dying man revealed to you. Holmes filled his pipe and lit it before responding, the familiar ritual seeming to help him organize his thoughts. The man was a professional assassin, Watson, a member of a Chinese criminal society known as the Black Lotus. This organization has branches throughout the Orient and maintains a significant presence in the Chinese quarters of several major cities, including London, San Francisco, and Shanghai. They offer hire to anyone willing to pay their considerable fees, and they are utterly ruthless in the execution of their contracts. Good Lord, I breathed. And they were hired to kill Major Ashworth? Indeed. But here is where the matter becomes truly interesting. The man told me that the contract on Ashworth's life was placed only 3 days ago, and that the telegram was sent as a lure to draw him to Limehouse, where he could be disposed of quietly and his body dropped into the Thames. However, the assassin also revealed something else, something that casts an entirely new light upon the affair of the stolen documents in Bengal. Holmes paused, and I leaned forward in anticipation. The Black Lotus were also responsible for the theft of those documents in 1893. They were hired by an English gentleman, a man of means and position, to infiltrate Ashworth's quarters and open the safe. The assassin did not know the identity of this gentleman, but he confirmed that the theft was carried out by one of their master safe crackers, a man who could open any lock by means of touch and hearing alone. Then Ashworth was telling the truth, I exclaimed. He was not responsible for the theft at all. Precisely, but consider the implications, Watson. An English gentleman of means and position hires a Chinese criminal organization to steal military documents from Bengal. Why, what possible motive could such a person have? The documents were of value only to foreign powers hostile to British interests. This suggests either treason of the most profound sort or something else entirely, something we have not yet grasped. And now this same person, or perhaps another, has hired the Black Lotus to kill Ashworth. Why, what threat does the Major pose? That, my dear Watson, is the question that must be answered if we are to unravel this mystery. But I believe the assassin's final words may provide a clue. He said, "The Vermilion cipher will reveal all." He repeated this phrase several times as if it were of the utmost importance. The Vermilion cipher will reveal all. What on earth does that mean? I asked, baffled. I have no idea, Holmes admitted, but I intend to find out. This affair has aroused my interest most keenly, Watson. We have a major unjustly disgraced, a theft of military secrets, an attempted murder, and a dying man's cryptic reference to something called the Vermilion cipher. These elements must all connect, must all form part of a coherent pattern. It is our task to perceive that pattern and act upon it before more lives are lost. He rose and went to the window, pulling back the curtain to gaze out at the awakening city. Someone fears what Ashworth might discover or reveal, Watson. Someone with resources sufficient to employ the Black Lotus, and with motives dark enough to encompass both theft and murder. This person has been operating in the shadows for years, protected by their position and their cleverness. But they have made a mistake in involving the Black Lotus, for that organization, like all criminal enterprises, has its weaknesses and its points of vulnerability. "What is our next step?" I inquired. Holmes turned from the window, and I saw that his eyes held that fierce light that always appeared when he was on the hunt. "We must speak with Major Ashworth again once he has rested. There are details of the original theft that we must explore more thoroughly. We must also make inquiries within the Chinese community of Limehouse. The Black Lotus may be secretive, but they are not invisible. Someone will have seen something, heard something, and we must discover the meaning of this Vermilion cipher. It could take weeks," I observed. "Then we shall take weeks," Holmes replied firmly. "This is no ordinary case of theft or murder, Watson. This is a matter that touches upon national security, upon the honor of a man unjustly accused, and upon the machinations of an organization that operates outside all law and morality. I shall not rest until I have brought the truth to light and seen justice done." I felt a surge of admiration for my friend. Here was the Holmes I knew best, brilliant, determined, utterly committed to the pursuit of truth. Whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever complexities we might encounter, I knew that he would not falter in his purpose. "You have my full support, Holmes," I said simply. "Whatever is required, I am at your service." He smiled, and for a moment the hard intensity of his expression softened. "My dear Watson, I have always been able to rely upon your loyalty and courage. This case promises to test both to their limits, but together I believe we shall prevail."
And so, dear readers, we leave our narrative at this most critical juncture. The pieces of the puzzle begin to arrange themselves before Holmes's keen intellect, yet the pattern remains maddeningly incomplete. What secrets lie hidden within the Vermilion cipher? Who is the mysterious gentleman in Mayfair whose gold sovereigns have financed such elaborate villainy? And what dark purpose drives men to steal military secrets and hire assassins from the shadows of Limehouse? The trail grows ever more dangerous, the stakes ever higher. Holmes and I stand upon the threshold of revelations that will shake us to our very foundations, revelations of betrayal most foul, of conspiracies that reach into the highest echelons of society, and of dangers that lurk closer than we dare imagine. But these extraordinary developments must await our next meeting. The game is far from over, and the most startling discoveries, the most perilous adventures, lie yet ahead. Join us next time as we continue the affair of the Vermilion cipher, wherein Holmes and Watson venture into treacherous waters indeed, and the truth behind this sinister affair begins at last to emerge from the shadows. Until then, I remain your faithful chronicler of these most singular events, Dr. John H. Watson, to be continued in the next thrilling installment.